Left alone, she marries a kind man with a simple life. Unaware of his secret wealth, she's in for a surprise when his true status is unveiled. And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. The gray clouds hung low over Seoul's skyline as Yoonji stood at her apartment window, her reflection barely visible in the glass. The 28th floor offered a panoramic view of the city, but she hardly noticed it anymore. 6 months had passed since Junho, her ex-fiancé, left her at the altar. The wedding invitations still sat in a box in her closet, unable to throw them away, yet unable to look at them. Her apartment felt emptier now than ever before. The space that was meant for 2 people now echoed with just her footsteps. She'd removed most of the couple photos, but occasionally she'd find one tucked away in a drawer or behind a book, like unwanted memories playing hide and seek. The local market bustled with its usual weekend crowd. Yoonji struggled with her grocery bags, having bought more than she could carry, a habit from when she used to shop for 2. As she attempted to adjust her grip, an orange rolled free from one of the bags. Before it could hit the ground, a hand reached out and caught it. "I think this belongs to you," a warm voice said. The man holding the orange had kind eyes and wore a simple navy sweater that had seen better days. He introduced himself as Dongwoo. "Thank you," Yoonji replied, trying to take the orange back while juggling her other bags. "Let me help you with those," Dongwoo offered, already reaching for the heavier bags before she could protest. His movements were careful but confident, and despite her usual wariness of strangers, Yoonji found herself accepting his help. They walked together, making small talk about the neighborhood. Dongwoo mentioned he'd recently moved to the area and worked at a small company nearby. His manner was unpretentious, his smile genuine. When he spoke, he looked directly at her, not at his phone or past her shoulder like so many people did these days. A week later, they met again at the same market. This time, their conversation lasted longer. Dongwoo suggested they take advantage of the rare sunny day and have an impromptu picnic at the nearby park. Yoonji surprised herself by agreeing. They sat on Dongwoo's worn jacket spread over the grass. He'd bought simple kimbap from a market, and Yoonji shared the strawberries she'd just purchased. The food wasn't fancy, but something about eating in the open air made everything taste better. "I lost my previous job last year," Dongwoo shared, picking at the grass beside the jacket. "Had to start over completely. Sometimes starting fresh isn't the worst thing that can happen to you." Yoonji found herself telling him about Junho, the words coming easier than they ever had before. "The worst part wasn't even the embarrassment," she admitted. "It was realizing that I'd built my whole future around someone who could walk away so easily." Dongwoo listened without interrupting, without offering immediate solutions or judgment. When she finished, he simply said, "Sometimes people leave so better things can find their way to us." The afternoon light softened, casting long shadows across the park. Children played nearby, their laughter carrying on the spring breeze. For the first time in months, Yoonji felt the knot in her chest loosen. She caught herself smiling, not the polite smile she wore for colleagues or the brave face she put on for family, but a genuine expression of contentment. As they packed up their impromptu picnic, Dongwoo's hand brushed against hers while reaching for the empty strawberry container. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her fingers. Their eyes met, and instead of looking away, they both smiled. Walking home, Yoonji realized she hadn't checked her phone once during their time together. She hadn't thought about Junho, or the wedding that never was. Instead, she'd been completely present in the moment, enjoying simple conversation and comfortable silences with someone who seemed equally content with life's basic pleasures. The gray clouds still hung over Seoul, but somehow they didn't seem as oppressive. The autumn leaves scattered across the sidewalk as Dongwoo and Yoonji walked hand in hand through their neighborhood. After 2 months of dating, their routine had become comfortable yet exciting. Every weekend began with their market visits, followed by impromptu adventures around Seoul. Today, however, felt different. Dongwoo seemed distracted, checking his phone more often than usual. "Let's stop here for a moment," Dongwoo said, leading her to a small wooden bench near the Han River. the same bench where they'd shared their first real conversation about their dreams and fears. He pulled out a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, and Yoonji's heart skipped a beat. "I'm not good with grand gestures," Dongwoo began, his hands slightly trembling. "I don't have much to offer except my promise to love you honestly and completely." He opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring with a small diamond. "Will you marry me?" The proposal wasn't elaborate or theatrical. No hidden photographers, no flash mob, no restaurant full of expectant onlookers. Just two people on a bench by the river, with the autumn wind carrying the scent of fallen leaves and possibilities. Yoonji looked at the ring, then at Dongwoo's anxious face. The simplicity of the moment struck her. How different it felt from her previous engagement, which had been a carefully orchestrated event at an expensive restaurant. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes." The wedding preparation moved quickly. Yoonji's parents, though initially concerned about the short engagement period, warmed to Dongwoo's sincere nature. Her mother helped plan a small ceremony at a local chapel, while her father spent long evenings talking with Dongwoo about their shared interest in traditional architecture. The ceremony itself reflected their relationship, intimate and unpretentious. 50 guests gathered in the chapel, decorated with white lilies and green ferns. Yoonji wore a simple white dress, and Dongwoo opted for a navy suit that reminded her of the sweater he'd worn when they first met. During the reception, Yoonji noticed Dongwoo step outside to take a phone call. Through the window, she could see his expression change from relaxed to serious. He spoke in low tones, his body language tense. When he returned, he kissed her cheek and explained it was work-related, but something in his eyes seemed distant. Later that evening, while Yoonji danced with her father, Dongwoo excused himself again. This time, he walked to his car and retrieved a leather briefcase she'd never seen before. He disappeared into an empty conference room of the venue, emerging 20 minutes later looking slightly stressed, but trying to hide it. "Is everything okay?" Yoonji asked when he rejoined her. "Just some urgent business matters," he replied, squeezing her hand. "Nothing for you to worry about on our wedding day." His smile returned, but Yoonji couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the reception wound down, a sleek black car pulled up outside the venue. Dongwoo noticed it through the window and tensed slightly. He quickly suggested they leave through the back entrance, claiming it would be more romantic to avoid the crowd. In their hotel room that night, while Dongwoo slept, Yoonji stood by the window watching the city lights. She thought about the mysterious phone calls, the briefcase, the black car. But then she looked at her sleeping husband's peaceful face and pushed the thoughts aside. Everyone was entitled to some privacy, she reasoned, even in marriage. What she didn't know was that at that very moment, in a high-rise office across the city, a group of executives were concluding a meeting about the Futu Re of one of Seoul's largest corporations. On the screen behind them, a document displayed the name of their CEO, a name that would soon send shockwaves through Yoonji's world. Married life settled into a comfortable rhythm for Yoonji. She transformed their modest apartment into a cozy home, adding small touches that reflected their shared life. Each morning, she woke early to prepare Dongwoo's breakfast, finding unexpected joy in mastering new recipes. The small balcony became her sanctuary, where she cultivated an impressive collection of herbs and seasonal flowers. Dongwoo left early for work and often returned late, explaining his small company was going through a growth phase. Despite his long hours, he always brought home small gifts, a packet of rare seeds for her garden, a new cookbook, or sometimes just her favorite street food. These thoughtful gestures made the long days apart bearable. One Saturday morning, while Dongwoo was supposedly at a business meeting, someone knocked on their door. Yoonji opened it to find a well-dressed man in his 40s, his expensive watch and tailored suit contrasting sharply with their modest apartment building. "I'm Min-ho," he said, his eyes scanning the apartment behind her. "An old friend of Dongwoo's. Is he home?" "He's at work," Yoonji replied, noting how Min-ho's eyebrows rose slightly at her response. "Work? On a Saturday?" Min-ho's laugh held an edge of disbelief. "That's not the Dongwoo I remember from university, though I suppose people can change or pretend to." He emphasized the last words, studying Yoonji's reaction. Before she could respond, Minho handed her a business card with only a phone number. "When you're ready to know the truth about your husband, call me." He turned and walked away, leaving Yoonji standing in the doorway, the card feeling heavy in her hand. That evening, during their dinner of homemade bulgogi, Yoonji mentioned Minho's visit. Dongwoo's chopsticks froze halfway to his mouth. "Minho came here?" His voice was carefully neutral, but his knuckles whitened around the chopsticks. "He said he knew you from university." Yoonji pressed gently. "We were close," Dongwoo replied quickly. "He's probably confused me with someone else." He changed the subject, complimenting her cooking and asking about her garden, but his usual warmth seemed forced. Later that week, Yoonji planned a romantic evening to celebrate their 3-month anniversary. She prepared Dongwoo's favorite dishes and set up a candlelit dinner on their balcony among her flourishing plants. As they ate, she noticed him checking his phone repeatedly, his mind elsewhere. "Is everything all right?" she asked, reaching for his hand across the table. "Of course," he smiled, but his eyes darted to the street below. A black car similar to the one from their wedding night was parked across the street. Dongwoo abruptly suggested they move inside, claiming the evening air was getting chilly despite the warm summer night. That night, as they lay in bed, Yoonji felt the distance between them growing. Dongwoo's arm was around her as usual, but his body was tense, his breathing too measured to be natural. When his phone buzzed with a message, he immediately checked it, shielding the screen from her view. The seeds of doubt planted by Minho's visit began to take root. Yoonji found herself noticing small inconsistencies in Dongwoo's behavior. How he always answered certain calls in private, his vague descriptions of his workday, the way he sometimes seemed to catch himself before saying something, as if constantly editing his words. She discovered a second phone hidden in his work bag while doing laundry one day. When confronted, Dongwoo claimed it was a company phone for international calls. The explanation was reasonable, but something about his too quick response felt rehearsed. The final moment of that evening haunted her. Dongwoo standing on their balcony, illuminated by the city lights, having another hush-ed phone conversation. From inside, Yoonji watched his reflection in the window, noting how his posture and even his manner of speaking seemed different, more authoritative, more refined. For a brief moment, he looked like a stranger. The accident occurred on a busy Tuesday afternoon in Gangnam. A sleek black Mercedes collided with a delivery truck, causing a multi-car pileup. Under normal circumstances, it would have been just another traffic incident in Seoul's bustling streets. However, when the Mercedes passenger emerged unharmed, smartphones captured what would become viral footage. Yoonji first saw it while scrolling through her social media feed during lunch break. The video showed Dongwoo, dressed in an expensive suit she'd never seen, being ushered into another luxury car by men who looked like professional security. The caption read, "Breaking, reclusive CEO of Young Enterprises spotted after accident in Gangnam." Her phone began buzzing with notifications. Messages from friends, family, and even old acquaintances flooded in. Most contained the same video or links to news articles with headlines like Young Dongwoo, heir to Young Enterprises, found living double life, and billionaire CEO's secret marriage revealed. At her office, colleagues whispered and stole glances at her. Her supervisor called her into his office, not to discuss work, but to awkwardly ask if she needed time off to handle her situation. Yoonji declined, despite feeling her world tilting on its axis. By afternoon, reporters had somehow obtained her work address. They gathered outside the building, cameras ready, shouting questions. "Mrs. Young, did you know about your husband's true identity? How does it feel to discover you're married to one of Korea's wealthiest men? Was this a calculated move to marry into the Young family?" Security had to escort her through a back entrance to reach her car. As she drove home, more reporters followed. The modest apartment building where she and Dongwoo lived was now surrounded by news vans and photographers. The elderly security guard who usually greeted her with a smile now looked overwhelmed and confused by the chaos. Inside their apartment, Yoonji turned on the television to see Dongwoo's face on every news channel. Business analysts discussed Young Enterprises stock prices rising with their CEO's reappearance. Entertainment shows speculated about their relationship, some painting her as a cunning gold digger, others as an unsuspecting victim. Her phone rang Dongwoo's number, but before she could answer, breaking news caught her attention. The headline read, Yoon Dongwoo's rise to power, the hidden years. The report detailed how the young heir had disappeared from public view 3 years ago, shortly after his father's death left him in control of the company. Speculation ranged from mental breakdown to corporate power struggles. Photos flashed across the screen. Dongwoo in business attire at corporate events, Dongwoo at charity galas, Dongwoo with his late father at company celebrations. In each image, he looked different from the man she knew, polished, powerful, distant. The humble man who caught her falling orange at the market seemed like a character in a play. The doorbell rang incessantly as reporters tried to get her statement. Her sister Minji called repeatedly, but Yoonji couldn't bring herself to answer. Instead, she sat in their dark living room, looking at their wedding photo. The simple ceremony, the modest ring, the navy suit, all carefully chosen to maintain his disguise. As night fell, a helicopter's searchlight briefly illuminated their balcony, likely from a news channel trying to get footage. Yoonji's herbs and flowers, which had seemed so important this morning, now felt like props in an elaborate deception. Her entire marriage, she realized, might have been built on carefully constructed lies. Her phone buzzed again with a message from an unknown number. Mrs. Young, I represent the Young family's legal team. We need to discuss some confidentiality agreements. Dongwoo arrived home near midnight, using a private underground entrance Yoonji hadn't known existed. He looked different, his posture straighter, his clothes impeccable, his humble demeanor replaced by something more polished. 2 security guards flanked him, checking the apartment before leaving them alone. I can explain everything, he said, his voice carrying a formal tone she'd never heard before. Yoonji sat silently on their couch, the same spot where they used to watch movies and share takeout dinners that now felt like scenes from someone else's life. Young Dongwoo, she said, testing the full name. CEO of Young Enterprises. Not the entry-level employee at a small company who could barely afford a simple wedding ring. Each word felt like glass in her mouth. Dongwoo, or rather, Young Dongwoo, loosened his expensive tie and sat across from her. After my father died, the corporate world became suffocating. Every relationship, every interaction felt calculated. I needed to know if someone could love me for who I am, not what I own. So I was what? An experiment in authentic living. Yoonji's voice cracked. Did you enjoy watching me struggle with our budget, planning cheap date nights, growing vegetables to save money? Those were the most genuine moments of my life, he insisted. Every smile, every conversation, every feeling was real. The only thing I lied about was my background. Their conversation was interrupted by Yoonji's phone ringing. It was Minji, her sister, again. This time, Yoonji answered. Have you lost your mind? Minji's voice was sharp with concern. Do you realize what you've gotten yourself into? The Young family isn't just wealthy, they're powerful. They can destroy people's lives with a phone call. I'm still the same person, Minji. And so is he. Yoonji paused, suddenly unsure of her own words. You need to get out now, Minji insisted. Before you're trapped in their world. Remember what happened to that journalist who investigated their overseas operations last year? He suddenly retracted his story and moved abroad. Is that the world you want to live in? After hanging up, Yoonji noticed her social media flooding with connection requests. Old classmates, former colleagues, even Junho, her ex-fiancé, suddenly wanted to reconnect. Their messages ranged from congratulations to thinly veiled requests for favors. One message stood out, from her former boss who had fired her last year. Dearest Yoonji SSI, I always knew you were destined for great things. Perhaps we could discuss some potential business opportunities. The same people who had witnessed her heartbreak and struggle now viewed her through the lens of her husband's wealth and power. Their sudden interest felt like salt in fresh wounds. Your legal team contacted me, Yoonji said to Dongwoo, holding up her phone. Confidentiality agreements? Is that what our marriage comes down to? Legal documents and damage control? Dongwoo moved to sit beside her, but she shifted away. The distance between them felt both physical and metaphorical. The simple gold band on her finger, which had once represented their love, now felt heavy with questions and complications. The media circus around their apartment complex continued for weeks. Yoonji took leave from work, unable to face the constant scrutiny. Their modest home, once a sanctuary, became a prison. Photographers camped outside, hoping to catch glimpses of the common woman who captured Korea's most eligible bachelor. Dongwoo arranged for them to move to a secured luxury apartment in Gangnam, but Yoonji refused. "This apartment is real," she said during one of their increasingly frequent arguments. "Everything here, the cheap furniture we bought together, my garden, our memories, none of it was staged." Her attempts to maintain normalcy proved futile. A simple trip to their local market, where their love story began, turned into a media frenzy. Store owners who used to greet her warmly now either fawned excessively or avoided eye contact entirely. The Ajumma who sold vegetables tried to give her free produce, insisting it's an honor to serve the Jung family. Dongwoo's efforts to protect her backfired consistently. He hired personal security, but their presence made Yoonji feel like a prisoner. He arranged for private shopping services, but Yoonji missed the simple pleasure of choosing her own groceries. Every solution he offered pulled them further into the world he'd tried to escape. Their arguments evolved from the initial betrayal to the daily challenges of their new reality. "I don't need another secretary to manage my schedule," Yoonji snapped one evening when Dongwoo's assistant tried to coordinate their dinner plans. "I just want to have a normal meal with my husband." "Nothing about our life can be normal anymore," Dongwoo responded, his CEO persona increasingly bleeding into their private moments. "The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." The weekly family dinners at her parents' house became tense affairs. Her father, once comfortable sharing architecture theories with Dongwoo, now seemed intimidated by his son-in-law's true identity. Her mother obsessed over using the proper honorifics and constantly apologized for their humble home. During one such dinner, her father cleared his throat nervously. "The bank called about my business loan," he said, glancing at Dongwoo. "They mentioned their close relationship with Jung Enterprises." "Dad, please," Yoonji interrupted, feeling sick. "Don't ask him for favors." The silence that followed was deafening. Dongwoo excused himself to take a business call, a habit that had become more frequent. Through the kitchen window, Yoonji watched him pace in the small backyard where they used to sit and talk for hours. Now he spoke in clipped tones about merger negotiations and board meetings, his simple sweaters replaced by tailored suits. That night, lying in their bed that suddenly felt too big, Yoonji realized their problems went beyond the lies. The Dongwoo she fell in love with, the one who caught falling oranges and made her laugh with bad jokes, was fading, replaced by Jung Dongwoo, the corporate heir who lived in a world of power plays and privileges. Minji's apartment in Hongdae, filled with art prints and vintage furniture, had always been Yoonji's refuge during difficult times. But today, as Yoonji sat on her sister's worn leather couch, the atmosphere felt different. Minji paced the room, her career as a gallery curator reflected in her artistic but modest surroundings, a stark contrast to the luxury Yoonji now had access to. "Have you seen this?" Minji thrust her tablet at Yoonji. The screen showed a Society page article titled "The Jung Family's New Princess, From Office Worker to Chaebol Wife." The article detailed Yoonji's supposed rags to riches story, complete with speculations about designer purchases and plastic surgery. "I don't read those anymore," Yoonji said, pushing the tablet away. But Minji wasn't finished. "This isn't just about trashy articles," she insisted. "Do you know what kind of power the Jung family wields? Last month, they acquired 3 companies in a single day. People lost jobs, families were displaced, all because of one boardroom decision." Yoonji noticed something beneath her sister's concern, a flicker of envy in the way Minji glanced at her designer handbag, a gift from Dongwoo she'd reluctantly accepted. The same sister who had consoled her after Junho's betrayal now viewed her with a mixture of worry and barely concealed resentment. "The Dongwoo I know isn't like that," Yoonji defended, but her voice lacked conviction. "The Dongwoo you know doesn't exist." Minji's outburst echoed in the small apartment. "He's a character he created to catch a normal wife." Think about it. Why would someone with his power pretend to be poor unless he had?
Ulterior motives.
The sisters' dynamic had shifted. Growing up, Minji had always been the successful one, top grades, prestigious university, respected career. Now, suddenly, her younger sister had unknowingly married into one of Korea's most powerful families, and the reversal of their positions created an unspoken tension. Later that evening, Minji received an invitation to curate an exhibition at Seoul's most prestigious gallery, an opportunity she'd been pursuing for years. The timing, right after her confrontation with Yoonji, raised uncomfortable questions. Did Dongwoo arrange this? Minji demanded over the phone, her voice trembling between anger and confusion. I didn't ask him to do anything, Yoonji replied, but doubt crept in. How many strings was her husband pulling behind the scenes? The upcoming charity gala loomed over them, Yoonji's first official appearance as Mrs. Young. Minji, also invited due to her gallery connections, watched her sister struggle with dress fittings and etiquette lessons. The woman who once shared clothes with her sister now wore outfits that cost more than Minji's annual salary. You're losing yourself, Minji warned during their final conversation before the gala. The Yoonji I know would never let someone else dictate her life, even if he is Young Dongwoo. As Yoonji left her sister's apartment, she caught Minji staring at her reflection in the window, smoothing her own department store dress with a conflicted expression. The sisters' relationship, once their strongest bond, was becoming another casualty of Dongwoo's revelation. The hotel's grand ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and wealthy patrons in designer wear. Yoonji stood in the preparation room, staring at her reflection. A Dior gown had replaced her usual modest dresses. Professional stylists had transformed her appearance. A stranger stared back at her in the mirror. Dongwoo's secretary had provided a detailed brief, which corporate rivals to avoid, which board members' wives to charm, how to deflect questions about their unconventional marriage. Just smile and say we met through mutual friends, the secretary had instructed, trying to rewrite even their origin story. The weight of the evening pressed down on her like the heavy diamond necklace around her throat. This wasn't just a party. It was her official debut into Seoul's corporate elite. Every gesture would be analyzed. Every word would carry implications for Young Enterprises' relationships. As she walked into the ballroom on Dongwoo's arm, whispers followed them. She recognized faces from business magazines and news reports, people who could influence national policies with a single phone call. Dongwoo moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his humble market persona completely gone. Park Min-ho, Dongwoo called out, greeting the same man who had visited their apartment months ago. Min-ho approached with a calculating smile. Mrs. Young, Min-ho bowed slightly. I see you never called me about that truth I offer to share. Though, I suppose the truth found you anyway. His eyes flickered to Dongwoo. Your husband and I have quite a history from university, or should I say, from the Young Enterprises boardroom? Before Yoonji could respond, another voice cut through the tension. The prodigal CEO returns. An elderly man approached, his expensive watch catching the light. You caused quite a stir with your unique approach to finding a wife. Your father would have never approved of such theatrics. Dongwoo's hand tightened on his champagne glass. My father's methods weren't always right, Chairman Lee. The chairman's smile didn't reach his eyes.
No?
Tell me, Mrs. Young, did your husband ever mention the real reason he disappeared 3 years ago? About the power struggle after his father's death? About the board members who mysteriously resigned? Yoonji felt Dongwoo tense beside her. The glittering ballroom suddenly felt like a minefield of secrets. Each conversation masked allegations, each pleasantry concealed threats. She watched her husband navigate this complex web with the skill of someone who'd grown up in this world, a world he'd hidden from her. As Dongwoo prepared to give his speech, Min-ho approached Yoonji again. You should ask him about the company's restructuring 3 years ago, he whispered. About why he really needed to disappear. Some say he was protecting himself. Others say he was protecting something bigger. The room fell silent as Dongwoo took the stage. Yoonji studied his face, searching for traces of the man who'd helped her with grocery bags and planted herbs on their small balcony. Instead, she saw Young Dongwoo, corporate heir and power player, about to address his peers. The silence in the ballroom felt heavy as a young reporter from the Korea Economic Daily stood up. "Mr. Young," he called out, interrupting Dongwoo's rehearsed speech about corporate responsibility. "There are rumors that your disappearance 3 years ago wasn't just about finding an authentic relationship, but about avoiding investigations into Young Enterprises' overseas operations. Would you care to comment?" The question hung in the air like suspended glass, ready to shatter. Security moved to escort the reporter out, but Dongwoo raised his hand to stop them. His eyes met Yoonji's across the room, and something in his expression changed. 3 years ago, Dongwoo began, his voice steady, "I discovered evidence of extensive corporate corruption within Young Enterprises. My father had built an empire, but its foundation was rotting." He loosened his tie, dropping the polished CEO facade. The board members who resigned weren't forced out. They left to avoid prosecution. "I didn't disappear to find myself. I disappeared to clean up the company without alerting those who would have destroyed the evidence." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Chairman Lee's face darkened. Min-ho took a step back, his usual smirk replaced by concern. "I spent 2 years working with prosecutors, providing evidence, restructuring the company from the shadows," Dongwoo continued. "But during that time, I lost myself in the deception, until I met someone who reminded me what authenticity meant." He turned to Yoonji, his voice softening. "I fell in love with you because you saw me as a person, not a position. The lies about my wealth and status were wrong, but every moment we shared was real. I kept the truth from you to protect you from this world, and to protect the investigation until it was complete." Chairman Lee stepped forward, his face red. "You dare to accuse Dash. The prosecution's report will be released tomorrow," Dongwoo interrupted. "Every document, every transaction, every illegal operation has been recorded. It's over." The ballroom erupted in chaos. Some guests rushed to make phone calls, others demanded explanations. Through it all, Yoonji stood frozen, processing the revelation. The mysterious phone calls, the hidden meetings, the careful deception. It hadn't been about manipulating her, but about something larger. The ballroom buzzed with frantic energy as corporate titans reached for their phones, making urgent calls to lawyers and board members. But Yoonji's attention remained fixed on her husband, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Neither the humble market worker nor the cold CEO, but someone who had carried an enormous burden alone. Standing amidst the chaos, Yoonji found her voice. "I understand now," she said, loud enough to draw attention. "You weren't running from your responsibilities. You were fulfilling them in the only way you could." Her words cut through the noise, causing heads to turn. Dongwoo stepped down from the podium, moving toward her, but before he could reach her, Minji's voice rang out from the crowd. "I knew." Minji stepped forward, her gallery curator's composure cracking. "I've known who Dongwoo was since the beginning." The revelation caused another wave of murmurs through the already agitated crowd. "I was consulting on art acquisitions for Young Enterprises when Dongwoo started his investigation," Minji continued, her voice shaking. "He needed someone to verify his new identity, someone who could watch over his chosen life without raising suspicions. I helped him because I saw what he was trying to do." She turned to Yoonji, tears in her eyes. "I watched you fall in love with him, and I watched him fall in love with you, really love you. Every time I wanted to tell you the truth, I saw how genuine your happiness was." Yoonji stared at her sister, understanding dawning. The warnings, the concerns, the apparent jealousy, all had been part of Minji's own complex role in this deception. She had carried this secret while watching her sister build a life with Dongwoo, torn between protecting the investigation and protecting her sister's heart. The exhibition offer, Yoonji realized. It wasn't a bribe from Dongwoo. It was recognition for years of discretion and support, Dongwoo confirmed. "Your sister helped save this company, and thousands of jobs with it." The truth settled over the room like falling snow, transforming everything it touched. The wealthy elite who had gathered to judge their unusual marriage now stood witness to the unraveling of a years-long operation that would reshape Korea's corporate landscape. Chairman Lee and his allies had already fled the ballroom. Minho lingered, raising his glass in a gesture that mixed respect with resignation. The reporter who had asked the triggering question was furiously taking notes. Dongwoo crossed the room to stand before Yunji. In his eyes, she saw both the man she fell in love with and the leader he had always been. "I should have trusted you with the truth," he said softly. "We both have to learn to trust," she replied, taking his hand. "No more masks, no more secrets." Minji joined them, forming a circle of 3 people bound by love, loyalty, and finally, truth. Around them, Seoul's corporate world was about to change forever. But in that moment, they were simply family, flawed, complex, but real. The story that began with a dropped orange in a market would become a legend in Korean corporate history. But for Yoonji, Dongwoo, and Minji, it would always be about something simpler: the courage to fight for what's right, the strength to forgive, and the power of genuine love to survive even the most carefully constructed deceptions.